Hi, this is MC Shetty for a new tutorial in my 1.18 Forge modding tutorial series. And in this tutorial we will have two main parts. In the first part we will talk about configuration. And in the second part, the largest part, we will make a new system, a mana system, where we will use various ways to store information in the world and on the player, and also do some networking. This will be part 1. In part 2, a upcoming tutorial, we will also do some graphics, some rendering, and some items to use that mana system. First, because it has been a while, let's update our Forge to the latest, and also check if there are new mappings. So new Parchment mappings, so that we have better parameters. That's this. So for Parchment, you can go here. And for the 3 main versions, you can find the latest in here. So let's update that. So we were a bit behind here. And the Forge version you can find here. And you can go to this site here and see the latest is 79. You can also see the changelog, what they have fixed. After that, you go to the Gradle tab and you hit refresh and you wait. By the way, Parchment, in case you don't remember, I talked about it, but it's basically official Mojang mappings to map the obfuscated names for Minecraft to readable names, but they don't do readable parameters, so that's what Parchment does. It works on top of the official mappings and adds readable parameters, which is very useful. After the refresh Gradle, you can do this, and normally that should work without problems. Yet you can ignore these. I'm not sure why it shows many errors, but the end result works. So build successful. And then you can switch back to run client here. You can do a compile test. So Control 9 in my case, Control F9 on Windows, and it will build. And normally there should be build completed successfully. There are no errors. So that's good. Now we want to configure our mod. Let's first push this. Update plus Parchment commit. Okay, so we will. There are various ways to do configs. I will do it by making a main config class in our setup package, like this. And let's make a register here, which we will call from here. Okay, so for configuration, there are 3 types of configs, and I will show them here. There's server-side, common, and client, and I will explain what they do in a moment, but let's first make these. Okay. And well, the best way to explain this, so let's do the the client configs first. Show some code. So Forge has some helper classes to make configs. So config files in Minecraft are in TOML format, TOML format, and using the Forge config spec button builder, you can easily create that. So first you make a builder. Here you add entries to the config. We will do that in a moment. And after that, you use that builder to build your config and you register it to type client. So let's also do the same for this. And I will explain in a moment what the difference is between client, common, and server, because that's very important. Oh, okay. So if you go check this, there's some documentation here. So that's the type of config. There's currently 3 types. There's common, there's client, and there's server. Client is easiest. That's configuration that is only relevant for the client. Usually you put stuff in there that has to do with rendering or with colors or with a position of a HUD element, for example. So that's done in client. That's the easiest one. The server has no access to it. It will not need it. It cannot use it. Common is stored on both client and server, but it's not synchronized. So not synced. So that means that if you have a server, it uses common configuration, and then you have a different client which different settings in common. Then server side, the server common config will be used, and client side, the client side common config will be used, which can cause problems. So you have to consider this when you use this, that it's actually not synced to the client and that the client config can be different from the server config. If you play single player, of course, that's not the case, but this, I don't use this often, but there is one case where you need to use it, and we'll explain that in a moment. For me personally, the most common used one is server. This is also server side, just like common, but it's synchronized to the client during connection. So that means that if you have a server which is set up with various configs here, and you connect it with your client will have the updated values for that server. So that's the most useful thing, in my opinion. It's important to note though that there's a very important difference between these two and this one. These two are stored in the config folder. So that's if you go to your Minecraft instance, these will be stored here, while this is stored in every world in here. So that means that every world has its own version of server configs, which is very useful because that means that you can have on the same instance different configs for every world that you play if you want that. But it also means that it's not usable to put configs in there that affect world creation, since the world has to be created before this exists. So that's important to note. Also, one important thing about server config, there's a default configs that you can use, which can hold configs, which can hold the defaults for server configs. For when a new world is created, the default configs are copied to the server configs on world creation. So that's specific for server. So when you make configs for your mod, you have to decide what the best type is where you want to put your config. If it's client side, then it's easy. Just use this. Otherwise, I recommend to use server unless it has to do with world gen, and then you should use common. That's my recommendation. Okay, so now where can we use configs? There were a few cases. For example, in our generator block entity, we had some values here at the top. Not these two. That's not something that should be configurable because that affects how many slots are in the container. And yeah, we have That's pretty hard coded. But these are configurable. So how do you do that? So what I would do, but that's just how you decide to organize it. In principle, you could put all configs in here, but I think it's better to make a specific config file that belongs with the thing that you want to configure. And what I do now is I refactor these values to generate a config. Okay, so they are already at the correct place, which is good. It means that this code has already been updated. And then we add our method. Let's zoom in a bit. Hold on. All right, this is better. Okay, so these settings, they control how our generator works. I will put them in the server config. So what do we do first? Settings for the generator. So we add a comment, we push generators, and at the end we do pop. So that means first we add a comment, and then we make a new section. So everything in the config that is with the generator will be in this section. Then these have to be changed. Like this. So there are of course problems because there are no errors in this code. We will fix those later. But basically, so we specify that this should be a forge config value of type integer. And we say collecting delay is server builder comment again. And let's copy that. It's a bit much. So delay in ticks before collecting items. So that's the comment. This is the key. That's how it will be named in the config file. The default value, which is this one, minimum and maximum. Okay. Let's do the rest as well. It's all the same. So here we actually define the different config values. We also have to call this. So from here, generator config, like this. So this way, by doing this, we make this modular. And so every thing has its own config file, and it's also modular in the config itself. Okay. Then we have to fix this. Let's see where the errors are. So the only thing you need to do here is add a .get to actually fetch the value. One more somewhere. Let's, here. So that's pretty easy. By the way, you can actually at runtime, you can also do set. It's automatically synced. So that's something that's possible with these configs. So that's basically it for the generator. So that's pretty easy. These are server-side configs that will go to the world. In a moment we will run this and we will see where all the configs went. But let's first make configs for the other things as well. So we also need a power again config like this. And so power again be, we have these values which we will move to here. Yeah. Let's fix that. I will just copy it in this case. It's the same as before. Register service. So exactly the same structure. We also call this from here. So we make our own new section here in here. In a moment, I will show you how that looks. Again, we need to fix some errors. Pretty easy. One more. That's it. I don't think that's real. Let's find usages. Oh yeah, forgot one. Oh, sorry, misclicked. Yeah. So in the block, it's also used. So here you see, this is actually called client side, but we can do this because these server configs are synced to the client when the client logs in. So we know this will be the correct value. So that's very nice. So I also want to add a client side config. So the power generator has a renderer. And there's this scale value here that I would like to configure. But that's pure client side. So we will add a new value here. It's a double value this time. And we will add a new section to configure it. It's exactly the same. This time we say register client config with client builder, client settings for the power generator, also same section, and just this single value. And from the render, we can then do it's a double, so we need to cast it to float. Yeah, and a little trick. So first we cast the double with a capital D to double, and then we can cast it to float. So that's how this works. We also need to call our client side. So that means here, origin, like this. So now we made a client side config. One other thing we want to configure is our ORs. So we have these values. Let's also make an ORs config. Same principle. We migrate these values to ORs config like this. And then we do basically the same. Replace these with these. And we use this. And this time our configuration has to be common because it's world gen and server config doesn't exist when the world is created. So we need to be this to be at common. Where's config? Okay, here. So we do it like this. All right. And then we have, of course, to fix the errors here. Let's make it a bit easier using Alt-A. Okay, so we can fix a few more errors at the same time. Same here. Like that. So yeah, that's basically it. Let's test if this works. Okay, so at this point, we haven't selected the world yet. If you now go look in the config folder, yeah, you see that these two are created. So the client and the common. Once we open a world, this one, or yeah, here you see the server config. So that's how this works. It's important to note the difference and where the configs will end up. Okay, one final thing, a very important one, which is something that is often done wrong. I specifically put this here, but it actually doesn't matter where it is. Registration of everything, of blocks, so all the things in here, happens before configuration. And even if I put this like this, it will still be that way. Because these just initialize stuff, they don't control when it happens. For example, this register will not actually already load the configs. It will just make it so that later on the configs will get loaded. Same with this, it will make it so that later on the blocks will get registered at the correct time. And the correct time is first registration, then configuration. Especially for server configs, which are even later because they are only done when the world is loaded. That implies that you cannot do registration based on configuration. So you cannot say, for example, this block, there should be a config for it to disable or enable it. That's not recommended. It's also not easy to do it. The way to fix that is to use data packs and make sure that the block has no recip when you don't want it. But you should always register everything. That's the basic ID. There are various reasons for that, mostly technical, and the most important one is that, yeah, for example, one thing, if you have a client and you log into different servers, if the config changes, you have problems with blocks that suddenly disappear and so on. It causes all kinds of problems, so that's why it's not allowed. All right, that's basically it. Configuration. So this concludes the configuration section of this tutorial. So to make things easier, I will actually stop the tutorial right here and do the other things that I talked about in the next one, so that this is a clear tutorial with just one subject, easy to use, and we'll expand on this in the next tutorial. So see you next time. Bye bye.